And movement of people is something, Irene, you are very much concerned with a large movement of people from various countries, particularly in areas of domestic work as well as construction work. How do you view this united ASEAN community that we're meant to be slowly moving towards? Do you wake up with nightmares about it, or do you feel like this will be a fantastic opportunity to create better rights for the people you're looking after?
I think if anyone wants to experience, want to realize ASEAN in them, it must come from an experience. And if you look at migrant workers who are moving by the millions within ASEAN region itself, they are, for me today, one of the most exploited form of labor that you have in the ASEAN region. And it really appalls that how, as basic as I put a sign here, one paid day off for domestic workers, it's not been agreed by the ASEAN governments themselves. So how can we claim to be people-oriented if we can't even provide or come to an understanding of basic labor rights like a day off or to recognize domestic workers' work? If we cannot come to that understanding, how can I look at a people-oriented ASEAN becomes a big question.
Well, actually, if you know, ASEAN has sectoral bodies. The sectoral bodies where it relates to, in this regard, human trafficking, taking care of human trafficking and also migrant workers. It is not exposed what we do or what we did. So many people don't know what ASEAN actually has done through the sectoral bodies of ASEAN.
Okay, I'll bring Debbie in here because I know that people is something you're very concerned about. You founded an alternative ASEAN network. Why did you feel the need to make an alternative ASEAN network, not work within the ASEAN framework that we already have?
One of the reasons we formed the alternative ASEAN network on Burma was that at that time, ASEAN governments still refused to address questions of human rights. And for many people in ASEAN, they saw ASEAN governments as not only oppressing their own citizens, but assisting other ASEAN governments to oppress their other citizens. As someone who has been arrested in Malaysia for organizing a regional conference on human rights in Indonesia and East Timor, I know that many of my friends have stood up for human rights in communities in neighboring ASEAN countries and have been persecuted for it. Some of them still are. So when Danny talks about an ASEAN where people feel safe to be in ASEAN, this is something that's quite important. We still don't feel safe. If you are Muslim or Rohingya in Burma, Myanmar, you are not safe. If you are an atheist in Indonesia, you are not safe. If you are a blogger in Vietnam, you are not safe. If you are a farmer in Cambodia, you are not safe. And if you are a refugee or an undocumented migrant in any part of ASEAN, you are definitely not safe.
We talk about safety. Do I feel safe in ASEAN? I think if I look at the more than 600 million people within ASEAN itself, if we do not feel safe traveling in each other's country, our airlinks, you know, the number of visitors that we go to each other's country will not have been increasing. I do acknowledge that there are certain specific interest groups, specific groups and so on, or may not be welcome in certain member states. But if I have to put it across the board and say that, no, I don't feel safe in ASEAN, I beg to differ. I feel very safe in Indonesia, I feel very safe in Cambodia, in fact, any of the countries I travel to, not because I'm a member of the ASEAN Secretariat. I've traveled as a private citizen, as a citizen of Singapore. Now, as for labor rights, yes, there are issues which we would like to see a lot of advance, we would like to see a lot of improvements. Now, is ASEAN dragging its feet on this? No, I think there are a lot of considerations. Are there progress? Definitely. Then my question is, changes based on what standards? Let's not forget that a lot of our ASEAN member states exercise a political right by vote. If they are not happy with the government, they have the right to vote them out. So these are the issues. So at the end of the day, the people will
You're
ask
shaking
themselves.
your head. Jump into debate, Debbie, there. Jump in there.
I think there's fundamentally a huge gap in terms of political freedoms and standards of free and fair elections. The quality of democracy and the standard of free and fair elections, if they are held, are quite questionable from one country to another. And this is not just about the political issue. There's also the fundamental problem of ASEAN economic integration in terms of the rules and regulations.
A lot of people that I've been reading are particularly concerned that this is going to be an unbalanced economic situation. You've got countries like Thailand, Malaysia and Singapore very ready to compete in a united market, but countries like Indonesia, some say, will basically be the biggest loser despite being the largest economy because it doesn't have the skills base ready to compete. How would you comment on that?
Yes, I think that is very true. Our country is mostly looked at only as a market. Maybe the policy will go on as far as capital inflow, outflow. But as far as protecting the workers' employment, I think each country, including Indonesia, I think to make sure that the employment of the locals are protected, including Singapore, including the nations that you are mentioning about, the more advanced nation.
There's a lot of emphasis on professionals being able to move, and this is part of the GATS Mode 4 of WTO, the World Trade Organization. And this is where there's an enabling environment for lawyers, for doctors, etc., to move in the ASEAN region. And the same thing doesn't apply for the other workforce. So there's contradictions for me within ASEAN.
Is it a fundamentally unjust situation then, Danny?
I will point this out. If you're talking about giving the workers the rights or the recognition, I think that recognition is something that's beyond the individual governments. It's beyond governments. It's a market ring. Now, it's very easy for the government to say, yes, I can raise my salary minimum wage 50%, 100% overnight. But how will the market respond? This is something the government can't control.
That's the market, that's the way the market works, and we've got a lot of different governments across Asia. Is that good enough?
I think that's, for me, is a huge problem, allowing just the market forces to make the decision. And I think that's problematic, because what the market forces are saying is deregulation. And deregulation means there's no protection. And I think, and where does human rights and protection come in, if not for the states to be responsible and accountable for that, including non-state actors?
This is what happens when we say the different sectors, different industries will see different growth, different opportunities. Do we have the people for all the jobs? This is where the job opportunity comes in. Because of the closer integration, if I'm a company, service company, I will need to have staff that can speak Bahasas, staff that can speak Tagalog, can speak Thai. This is where the opportunities come in. And that's why I do acknowledge that if you look at different sectors, yes, lower skilled labor anywhere across the world, it is always very challenging. It is always something which the governments want to address. And it is challenging because it is not something you do overnight. It has to be gradual. The skills upgrade in terms of education, all these have to come about. Okay, if I have to link it to education, a country without growth, where's the money going to come to finance all your education? That's where it's all linked. When I look at it specific, separate, it says that no, it's not good, I want to push ahead.
Stop spending so much on military hardware, invest it in education. At the moment, individual ASEAN countries keep investing more and more in military spending. Last year, the Burmese military received 57% more funding. This year, they're receiving nearly 20% more funding. if we look all across the board, there's an arms race for submarines in this region where most of the water is very shallow anyway. Why don't we spend it on education and training? That our country, our whole region is rich enough to do that. There is no political will. That's the problem.